Thank you to everyone for joining. I think that when the tragedy that happened on October 7th happened, we were all just in a complete state of shock. Some of us knew information from a little bit before, but still, whether it was a day before, whether it was on October 7th, 8th, whenever it is that you became aware of the reality that was now surrounding us, we were all in shock. And after a day, 2 days, 3 days, I remember people starting to talk and say, we're so immersed in this sadness, in this tragedy. How are we going to sustain this? How long are we going to need to sustain this? And I think that we all hoped that it would be some sort of miracle, that after that horrible week, we would miraculously be able to say that it was all over, that we didn't have to think about it anymore. We didn't have to talk about it anymore. We wouldn't hear the word hostage, the word infiltration. We wouldn't have to think about these horrible things anymore. However, as we all know, today marked 100 days since that horrible day. And it's not that we're commemorating what happened. We are still very much actively within the situation. There are over 100 of our brothers and sisters who have spent 100 days in Hamas's captivity. We cannot even begin to fathom what that means. But those of us who are not acutely experiencing what is happening still feel connected. And if at this point we have to admit to ourselves that we might not feel as connected as we did in the beginning, by being here tonight, you are showing that you want to feel connected still, that you don't want to pretend that nothing is happening, that you want to connect to Am Yisrael and feel what we are all going through as a collective. Just because those of us that are in America, whether we're in Chicago, New Jersey, wherever we are found, that we are all coming together on this Zoom, we are here with one voice saying that we want to be a part of the collective of Am Yisrael. We want to be part of the experience that we are all still experiencing. But as you know from previous Neely Journey of Inspiration programs, our goal here tonight is not just to cry with the speakers, not just to experience some passing inspiration, something that in the moment we'll say, wow, and by tomorrow we'll have moved on. Our goal with the Neely Journey of Inspiration is that when one comes into this program and when one leaves this program, you have a different perspective. You have renewed sensitivities or new sensitivities. You have gained a feeling, a thought, an emotion that you didn't have before. So that is what we are here to do tonight. We have 3 incredible women who have agreed to share their experiences. They are the incredible women who have been fighting on their own form of the front lines. They all live, at least for the most of their time, in Israel and have experienced this situation that Am Yisrael is going through in very different ways from one another. But something they all share is that they have all been fighters. They have all done something else to fight on behalf of Am Yisrael, and for that, we are very honored to welcome them here this evening to speak. As we are going to see, each one of the speakers is in a different situation, but at least one of our speakers has woken up at 5 o'clock in the morning to share her experience with us. And for that, we are very, very grateful, and for being willing to open up about something that is so raw, something that you are still experiencing. We know is not easy, and we very much appreciate it because it will help us to be able to feel like we are more a part and more that we can contribute to Am Yisrael at this time. So what we are going to do tonight is we are going to begin with a parak of Tehillim. You can say it along with me at home. No need to unmute. I'll believe you that you're saying it along with me. We're going to start with a parak of Tehillim on behalf of Chayalei Tzahal, those that are still fighting on our behalf, those that live in Eretz Yisrael, that everyone should remain safe, those that have been injured, that they should be healed, and those that are being held hostage, that Emir Tashem, they should be released speedily, and they should have a full refuah shalima, refuah hanefesh, and refuah haguf. So we're going to start with Tehillim Kuf Chaf Aleph 121. Shir Lama'alos Esa Einai El Harim Me'ayin Yavo Ezri. Ezri Me'im Adonai Oseh Shamayim Va'aretz. Al Yitain Lamot Reglacha Al Yanum Shomrecha. Hine Lo Yanum V'Lo Yishan Shomer Yisrael. Adonai Shomrecha, Adonai Tzilcha Al Yad Yaminecha. Yomam Hashemesh Lo Yakeka V'Yarech Balayla. Adonai Yishmercha Mikorah Yishmer Et Nafshecha. Adonai Yishmer Tzischa Uvoacha Me'ata Ve'ad Olam. Our three speakers tonight are going to be Mrs. Tali Wool-Garanter, Mrs. Shelley Richmond Cohen, and Mrs. Jody Stender. Each of these women serves in a very different role, and we are really looking forward to hearing from each of them this evening. Our first speaker is going to be Mrs. Tali Wool-Garanter. Tali grew up in Chicago and made Aliyah in 2010. She currently lives in Givat Shmuel with her husband and 4 daughters, where she serves as the director of Mizrahi OUJLIC in Givat Shmuel and Bar Ilan with her husband Svi. Tali is also a professional makeup artist and college teacher and loves empowering women in both of these areas. Now, as it goes, we planned with Tali many, many weeks ago that Tali was going to be so amazing, and she was going to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning, even though she is home with all of her children because her husband is currently serving in Miluim. And then, very exciting for Tali, her husband was able to surprise her and come home. And I said, Tali, there is no reason for you to, on the one day that you can sleep in from the past 100 days, wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning to speak to us. But we really did want to hear from Tali. So Tali conducted her interview earlier today, and we pre-recorded it. So we will be playing a video from Tali, which is the interview that we would have conducted live, and then we will go on to our other speakers. So right now, I present our conversation with Mrs. Tali Wool-Garanter about life as a wife of a soldier who is serving in Miluim.
Hi, how are you? Please feel free to introduce yourself. Who are you? Where are you from? And what do you do?
Hi, everybody. I'm Tali, formerly Abel, now Wool-Garanter. I was born and raised in Chicago, and in 2010, I made Aliyah and have been living here pretty much ever since. My husband, Svi, and I are the directors of the Mizrahi OUJLIC in Givat Shmuel and Bar Ilan. So we provide support for students who are studying in Bar Ilan and young adults who come and made Aliyah on their own, who are coming from religious backgrounds, Orthodox backgrounds, and we just try to support them, create a sense of community and home for them here in Israel.
That's great. And how do you feel your role has changed since October 7th?
Well, I can tell you that a primary part of our role as the directors of JLIC here is the Shabbos piece, that we, in addition to doing events throughout the week where we host learning events and social events, whether at our house or in other places, the bulk of our organic opportunity to meet people really takes place on Shabbos. And now that my husband is in the army, we don't really spend Shabbos here. I, Baruch Hashem, have 4 daughters, and it's not something that I see as good for them, for us to be home alone for Shabbos when my husband is serving. So we've been pretty much at my parents' every Shabbos since he drafted. And because we're not here for Shabbos, my role as a JLIC director has changed a lot because I don't have that opportunity really to host and meet people in that organic way on Shabbos. But I guess I should tell you a little bit about how and when and why it's drafted. So Tzvi and I actually met when we were both in our gap year. He was in his second year and I was in my first. He was studying in Shalvim for men in the boys' yeshiva, and I was in Shalvim for women in the girls' seminary. And we did not meet through the seminary or yeshiva. We actually met because Tzvi was studying in the same year as my brother Donnie, who some people in the audience may know, Donnie Abel. And my brother had the idea to set us up. And luckily it was a good idea. And we started dating and got engaged and got married pretty quickly within the year of my gap year. And when Tzvi and I met, Tzvi was actually serving in the army. He had drafted as a lone soldier, as a Chayal Boded. So he was in Shalvim and he was part of their Hesder program, but he took a portion of the Hesder time to go serve in the army. And you might say it was the uniform that did it for me, and that's why we ended up together. And I wouldn't say you were wrong necessarily. But you know, after he finished his service and we got married, we then left Israel for 2 years to go back to Chicago to finish our schooling there. And when Tzvi left the army, he was given what's called a ptor from Miluim, an exemption from Miluim. And the reason was because they knew we were going back to the States for him to study, and they weren't going to require him to come back from the United States. Once he had already drafted as a volunteer, they weren't going to then require him to come back. So we left and finished our studies in Chicago at HTC and at TI. And then in 2010, we made Aliyah. And when we came back to Israel in 2010, we had a little bit of a discussion about Miluim and how that would look for us. Because he wasn't required to do Miluim, it kind of was our choice at that point. And we both decided, and by we both, I mean, I told Tzvi that Miluim wasn't realistic for our family at the time. We had no immediate family on my side living in Israel at the time. And so for that reason, we felt like we weren't like the typical Israeli family who has immediate family who can help support them and help with the kids and just emotionally be there for them. So we made the decision I made the decision for him not to re-enlist and to do Miluim. And that's kind of how it stayed until October 7th.
That's great. And so beautiful to hear. And since October 7th, please tell us your experience since October 7th. What are the biggest challenges? Were there aspects of the situation in particular that you had not encountered before?
Yeah, so once the war broke out, Tzvi and I looked at each other and I immediately knew he was going to find a way to get back into the army. And essentially what he had to do was get an exemption from his exemption. And when I tell you he called every person he knew, every contact he had, formerly from when he was in the army, currently people that we know now who are in the army, until he finally got that ptor from his ptor, that exemption from his exemption, so that he could re-enlist. And people keep asking me, how could you let him go? You know, why are you letting him go? You have 4 kids at home. You know, it's not easy. And, you know, now thank God my family does live here, but they don't live in close proximity. How could you let him do that? And I said, you know, moving to Israel was our choice, and him re-enlisting, I guess, is our choice. But us being part of this nation and being part of the history of what's happening, being part of Medinat Yisrael, that's not our choice. That's our privilege. And so for him to go serve in the army, that's the way for both of us to really be part of what is happening now. And it really came to fruition 2 weeks after the war started. On October 19th is when he officially redrafted into the army. And since then, we are experiencing a new, I wouldn't say normal, but a new routine where Tzvi's mostly gone. He gets home about a couple days every 2 to 3 weeks. Sometimes it's Shabbos, sometimes it's not. He's usually home every 3rd Shabbos. And I would say the biggest challenge in all that, you know, people might think it's the logistics of carpool and getting the kids to bed and doing homework. And for me, a big challenge is taking out the garbage and just simply the logistics of running a household. And yes, all those things are difficult, but I'm so blessed to have a lot of support from my family with those logistical pieces. My father has actually been sleeping over every single night since Svi left. Any night that Svi's not here, my dad is here, and he has been a tremendous help. But the biggest challenge really is the loneliness of running the household. And it's not the logistical piece, it's the emotional piece of keeping track of everyone's schedules and making sure the kids are happy and well adjusted and remembering who needs to get where and when, and just that emotional burden of being the sole parent during this time. Not to mention my own fears while Svi is serving and my own grief and coping during this war, and kind of trying to hide that from the kids and not having a place to really let it out because there's nobody to pick up that emotional slack.
Wow. And how do you feel this situation affected your children? And do you relate to them during this time, or is it more you're
Yeah,
living
so
on autopilot?
yeah, so there's a lot of autopilot for sure. Definitely now that we're 3 months into it, it's become autopilot, but I'll speak more to the first 2 to 3 weeks of the war and of Tzvi being in the army. Just for a little context, I have 4 daughters. My oldest is 14. Then I have an 11-year-old, a almost 8-year-old, and an almost 6-year-old. So there's a range of ages, and they've each really been coping in their own way. My oldest, I have to be really careful with her not to make her another parent. She's at this age where she's somewhere between being an adult and being a kid. And I don't want her to feel the responsibility of stepping into the role of where Tzvi isn't. And so with her, there's this delicate balance. My 11-year-old is scared, anxious, nervous, but that's her baseline. So we'll let that slide. And what's very interesting is the little ones, my 8-year-old and 6-year-old, almost both of them, they've really been coping in a very different way. And I think it's partly because they don't know how to articulate as well what they're feeling. And something really interesting happened with my youngest. And gone, there was one day when one of the assistant teachers left the room. And suddenly my daughter kind of was very agitated and very upset. And even since the whole war started, she's been much more agitated. She's usually a very happy kid. And in those first few weeks, she just was crying more easily, upset more easily. Oh, and here she is. Excuse the interruption. This is Serena.
Hello, Serena.
You go with Sophie to play, and I'm gonna come when I'm done with my meeting. It's not Leola. It's a different meeting. Speaking of, so when excuse the interruption, when her assistant teacher left the room, suddenly Serena was even more agitated than she had been. And the main teacher looked at her and said, "Serena, what's wrong? Why are you upset?" And she turned to the teacher and said, "I miss Gavi," the teacher who left. And all of a sudden, Serena burst into tears and said, "And I miss my Abba too," and finally was able to articulate that she misses Tzvi, and she didn't know how to say that until then. And once we kind of figured out that that's what she was feeling and that's what she was going to, we came up with a plan, and we came up with a plan of how to kind of find ways for her to be able to articulate. And she keeps a picture of Tzvi in her drawer and gone, and she can go look at it when she misses him. And now she knows before she goes to bed, Abba's going to say Shema on the phone instead of in person. And these new routines that we've come up with have made it a little bit easier for the kids. And as time goes on, unfortunately, kids are very resilient, and they've gotten used to this 3 months of upheaval much easier than I think the adults have.
Wow. And Are there any particular stories or instances that stood out from your experiences? No, there must be a lot, but is there anything specific?
A story that stands out specifically. I mean, I will say that the war itself has shown me that I wouldn't rather be anywhere else than here. A lot of times we can complain about how hard it is to make Aliyah. And I mean, I've been here 13 years and there are things that are difficult and there are things that I miss about the ease of living in Chicago and things that I was used to and drive through Dunkin' Donuts and Trader Joe's and all the products that I miss. But what I will say is being here through this, living through this, it reaffirms in me for myself and for my family that this really is the right place for us and where I want to be raising my kids. I see the pride that my kids have, even just from the music that we've been listening to. And that's something that really stands out from the beginning of the war. We're a very big musical house, not because we're good at singing, but we love listening to music. We always have music playing in the kitchen, in the bedrooms, wherever we are, and a variety of music. Jewish music, secular music, everything from R.E.A. Kunstler and the Maccabees to Ed Sheeran and One Republic. And since this war has begun, I've seen myself and my kids, we haven't been able to listen to mainstream music. We've only been able to listen to songs that bring about emotion and speak to our experience that we're going through now. And I say that even of the kids, barring my youngest who's still listening to Elsa and, Cinderella, but the rest of us, we feel uncomfortable listening to the songs that we used to listen to before. And it's such a strange phenomenon that even the kids are experiencing that. And in the last few weeks, I will say there's been a shift from listening to sad, kind of depressing, heart-wrenching music to where we've been listening to like uplifting, empowering music that like still has that feeling of Am Yisrael Chai and that war element, but it's a much more empowering feeling. And I find that just a very interesting phenomenon that we've experienced.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And we want to focus here tonight on how we can learn from your experience. Is there anything particular sensitivities that you think as a nation we can learn from your experience as we hear it through you?
So I love this question because this actually takes me back not only to this experience, but to a more personal, individual experience that I've gone through. My youngest daughter, and I'm surprised it's taken me this long to bring this up because usually within the first 2 minutes of a conversation, I bring this up. My youngest daughter, Serena, has a rare form of epilepsy called Dravet syndrome. And it lands us in the hospital a lot. Her seizures are extremely unpredictable. And through her illness and through her diagnosis, I've learned a lot about us as a nation and the way that we take care of each other. Sorry, speaking of, she somehow knows exactly the right moments to come in. You go sit on the couch and go use that, Ken. What can you learn from this experience? It's something that I learned through my experience with Serena, and that is checking in on people, being present for people. When Serena was in the hospital, people would send me a message, I'm thinking of you. Or now, getting a text message of, from a friend with an emoji, a heart, an Israeli flag, and crying face. There's no expectation of me to respond. The pressure isn't on me to then say how I'm doing. Because when we write to someone, hey, how are you? How am I supposed to answer that question? I'm not great. My husband's on the border of Gaza. I'm not great. My brothers and sisters were killed in cold blood on the border, just minutes from where I live. And I'm not great. my kids miss their Abba, but I'm fine. Like, I'm fine day to day. We're coping. We have dinner. The kids take baths. They sometimes do their homework. We're fine. So to ask, how are you, is a much harder question than to just say, I'm thinking of you, or I'm sending my love. And that's really something that I've seen through this time and through my own personal experience, is that being there doesn't mean doing something necessarily. It just means being present. And I've seen over and over again my friends from all over the world who are there for us, who are present, who are sending messages, who are sending small gifts to my kids, just colored books, nothing big, but just to know that we're not alone. And my message really to the people sitting here tonight, to those of you who are constantly davening for us in Israel and constantly worried about us, keep worrying, keep davening, and keep checking in, because while a lot of people's lives have gone back to normal, people have gone back to work, kids are back in school, public transportation is running as usual, and people are coming to Israel on solidarity missions and trips, and life isn't normal. Nothing about this is normal. Nothing about putting my kids to bed alone for the 100th day is normal. Nothing about reading the news in between every time we roll over when we're sleeping. That's not normal. So please just keep that in mind, that everything you are doing at home impacts us here, and we feel it, and we see it, and we appreciate it. And just don't forget about us.
Thank you so much, Tali.
All right. Well, thank you so much for allowing me to share my story and what it's like being the wife of a lone soldier. Well, not lone soldier, but being Olim, who have, someone drafted in the army, being what they call us Milu Ima. And thank you for letting me share and letting me be part of this special evening. And I really hope that all the inspiration that you get tonight will continue to be Lisa for us here in Israel and for yourselves at home.
Okay, thank you to Tali. And Tali, we'll send out in the recap email where we follow up from the evening her contact information. She is very happy to reconnect with anyone who she knew from Chicago. And if anyone has any questions, they are welcome to reach out to her. Now I'm going to introduce our second speaker for the evening. And just before I do that, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we will get to questions at the end. So our second speaker that we are honored to welcome here tonight is Mrs. Shelley Richmond Cohen. Shelley Richmond Cohen is originally from Skokie and attended Ida Crown. She is a married mother of wonderful children and grandchildren living in New York and Tel Aviv. Her early career was in political consulting within the Jewish community. She held positions at the Coalition of Free Soviet Jews and the JCRC of New York. Her oldest son, Nathaniel, passed away at age 21 from Duchenne muscular dystrophy in 2007. Shelley then became an advocate for people with disabilities as a speaker, developer of curriculum on inclusion for rabbinical students, and consultant to synagogues, Jewish day schools, and summer camps. She held positions as a board member of Respectability USA, the Foundation for Jewish Camps, Lincoln Square Synagogue, and American Friends of Beit Izzy Shapiro of Ra'anana. She currently serves on the board of the New Jersey Y Camps, and she joined the Lincoln Square Synagogue Chaver Kadisha in 2008. I'm going to welcome Shelley up for us to have our discussion, and she will share with you her role since October 7th. So thank you, Shelley, for being here this evening.
It's my pleasure. Full disclosure, it turns out Tali married my niece. Tali's brother, who introduced her, married my niece. So it's a very small world indeed.
It is a very small world, especially in Chicago.
Yeah,
tell you that much.
That's for sure. I officially made Aliyah a year ago, last November, with my husband. And we had, in very last minute way, had planned to be Sukkot in Tel Aviv with my daughter. Actually, we went to a hotel, had a beautiful time, but my children wanted to be back at their own synagogue for Simchat Torah. So on that Friday, Friday morning, we went back to Tel Aviv. And sure enough, on Saturday morning, the truth was that we were still a bit jet lagged. It takes me a week. And I think we actually slept through the Azakah, the first Azakah that happened in Tel Aviv, which happened early in the morning. And of course, I heard the boom from the Iron Dome. And I woke up with a start, and I looked at my husband, who was deep asleep, and I thought, what was that? Is something going on in the West Bank? I didn't register in my brain. After he woke up, he said, I asked him if he had heard anything, said absolutely nothing. And we got dressed, and he headed to shul. I stopped at my daughter's apartment thinking I'd help her with her kids and to go to shul. And she, there was going to be a women's tefillah, and she was laning, she had already left. And so I ended up walking to shul myself. And in Tel Aviv, there are certain kiosks that you pass along the way that have always remained open as long as I can ever remember being there. My daughter's already living there over 5 years. And I thought to myself, wow, Tel Aviv really is becoming more religious. These kiosks are closed, it was like, nothing was registering in my brain, to be perfectly honest. And I get to shul, and here, I don't know if you're familiar with 126, the big shul in, it's what we call on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, it's like the new Lincoln Square. Lincoln Square used to be the hub of everything, especially in Rabbi Riskin's day, from those of you from Efrat. And so everything was just altered. And then throughout the day, of course, there were more azakot. The neighbors started telling us, my daughter has a lot of Chiloni neighbors. They started telling us they were seeing things. This was going to be a war that was going to be like no other, that terrible things were happening. And we began to hear bits and pieces, but it really wasn't until Motzei Shabbat that we really began to understand the horrors of what had taken place during the day and what was really going on. I guess I need to fast forward to my story to Motzei Shabbat the following week. Anybody who had the zechus, and I mean really the zechus of being in Israel at the outbreak of the war, saw and felt a feeling of achdus that was really palpable. I remember that on our flight home right before Thanksgiving, our flight to New York on Thanksgiving, we had to return to New York the Monday before Thanksgiving, and my husband, on the other side of my husband, was sitting a Navy SEAL officer from the United States of America, and my husband spoke with him, and the Navy SEAL who was there in an official capacity said to my husband that the most amazing thing he saw about Israel was that he said, in America, when something happens, he said, everybody turns to government agencies to see what they will do for the people. If there's a hurricane, it's this government agency and that government agency and this and that, and that's what happens. And in Israel, he said, everybody, it's the people rely on themselves. They say, we're at war, the government has to figure out what the army's doing. And we as a people, the Israeli people, he said he's never seen anything like it before. And what he was responding to and what he was saying was truthfully what I witnessed, which was that there was instantaneous volunteering on every front possible. There were a million WhatsApp groups lending out, saying, blood drives were needed here, and they immediately became organized and happened. And they needed a certain amount of towels and toiletries, and everybody went and cleaned out all of the drugstores in Tel Aviv and brought them to places that were already all organized and how to get everything down to all of the people from the south who were coming in and from the north who were coming in to the center of the country and needed these supplies. And it was just one thing after another. There were constant WhatsApp group. And on the Motzei Shabbat of the week after, it came through on a WhatsApp group. My daughter was reading, things for us of where, what and how we would volunteer. And my daughter reads and she says, they're asking for people who are members of the Chevra Kadisha. And she looked up at me and she said, Mommy, do you think you want to do this? And to know me is to know that I am not a person who can watch horror movies or violent things. I'll if it comes to a point in a movie, I'll shield my eyes and close my ears. I'm not one for that sort of thing. And at that moment, I knew what it was implying, the fact that they were asking for volunteers for the Chevra. I knew what that meant. And I took a deep breath and I said to her, and I thought to myself, maybe this is the reason that we came, and we came for Sukkot so last minute. And maybe it was that this is the reason I'm here at this moment in time in Eretz Yisrael. And I said to her, you can put my name and information in. She did. And it was immediately a number of hoops and a number of a vetting process, what was happening. And essentially what one has to understand is that in Eretz Yisrael, here in the Chicago area, in the New York area, we all have Chevra Kadishas from our communities, from our respective shuls, our communities, and it's a volunteer basis of what we do. I had never, ever thought, I never had the desire to be on a Chevra Kadisha. I know people who this is what they saw their parents or their grandparents do, and they felt that this is their calling. I never had a calling. When my son passed away back in 2007, I was incredibly touched by all of the people who were tangentially related to my family, connected to my family, who they stayed and were shomrim, and they did rotations, and just the kindness with which individuals who were connected to my son, who asked to do the tahara for my son, I was incredibly touched and incredibly moved. And since, as any parent of a child with a disability will tell you, once you've caretaken the bodily functions of a person who's paraplegic or quadriplegic, you lose a lot of your stigmas of things that you think you can't handle. And I realized then the following year after I said Kaddish for a year for my son, when the year was up, because really for a child, you only have Avelis truthfully for 30 days, but my husband and I both decided to say Kaddish for my son. He didn't have the zchus of living to have children, and we felt who better, more than us, should say Kaddish for him. So when our year ended, I started my volunteer work for the Chevra Kadisha on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And my whole thought was I wanted to pay forward the mitzvah that had been done so lovingly to my son. So here, when this came about, I really felt like I was just pushing the buttons within myself on doing the right thing, of volunteering to help these people who literally died al Kiddush Hashem to enter into the next world. That was really my thought. And what happened then was there was like kind of a vetting process, because in Israel, the Chevra Kadishas are paid people, that it is a paid job essentially. So they don't have volunteer Chevra Kadishas. I know in Efrat and in the Gush, they're trying to create a volunteer Chevra, but it's just kind of getting off the ground now, as opposed to it being anything in Israel. The army has its own Chevra Kadisha, and it takes care, and it's very used to dealing with mutilated bodies, because unfortunately, that's oftentimes what is the case of what they are dealing with. In civilian life, gratefully, most of us dealing in a Chevra do not deal with that. And so there is a whole Tahara process that one learns as one becomes part of a Chevra Kadisha. And when somebody dies from mechablim, from terrorism, from terrorists, you don't have a Tahara process. It's an impossibility to do, because the bodies are often so mutilated that every ounce of blood has to be kept intact, and there can be no Tahara process. So really what happened here was that the system got overwhelmed. You had about 1,000, what they thought would be 1,000 bodies, that were being identified through the course of the week and were being sent to the Chevra Kadishas. There was really, the main one was really in Rishon LeZion, and that's where it was being handled. But the paid workers were really overwhelmed, and they needed people. And so there was this slight vetting process. And a rabbi interviewed me. You had to be an Israeli citizen, you had to be fluent in Hebrew. And they had to know that you knew essentially what the process was. Now, ironically, I found that part was a bit strange, but I realized that maybe what they were looking for were people who would be used to dealing with dead bodies and would not be afraid. They wanted to make sure that you had enough experience that that you could be helpful to the paid workers who were there. And the whole process from the get-go, we never talked about it as a Tahara. It ended up being, it's referred to as Hachneset Meitim. It's preparation of the dead, because you are preparing them as best you can, but you're not following a kahalacha of what one does for the average Tahara. And I have to say that it was one of the most difficult things I've ever done in my life. And I also feel like it was one of the biggest privileges. It was a true zechut to do this. My parents were, I'm from Skokie. I'm a daughter of survivors. And I have to say that I had uncles, grandparents who did not, that went to their deaths without any sort of Jewish ritual burial. And I felt like this was truly a chance to give back, because the things I saw and what happened to these people was no less horrific than really what happened in the Holocaust back in the 30s and 40s. And so I don't know, Emma, if you had.
Okay, yeah, I have my,
Okay.
wow. What were some of the biggest challenges perhaps that you encountered while going through this process? And were there aspects of this situation that were, besides for, like you said, that the halacha is different in this situation, were there other aspects that were different than what you had encountered in being in the chevra before? Emotionally, was it different for you? What was the...
Well, clearly, it had to have been a very much more emotionally difficult situation. I know that after I spoke, there were various people. There were, I even try and think back of how it all came about, that there were 3 of us that ended up getting chosen outside of those from the Gush that were taken. There were 3 of us, 2 other Olim and myself. And I remember that I was the first one who, after the rabbi spoke to me, he immediately put me on the roster for the next day, for Sunday, to be doing, I believe it was like 5-hour shifts. It was a kind of insane sort of one body after another was being brought in, and you were preparing one body after another. In those women who are on this call who are part of Chevras know that I don't think that's ever happened to you here. I mean, it's a rarity that you have one body after another after another. I think that day we did 15 or 17 bodies on our shift alone. It was like a 5-hour shift. And my daughter said, Mommy, are you sure you're mentally prepared for this? And I looked at her and I said, I'm not sure I am. I said, I know I feel I should do this, but I'm not sure I am. And she said to me, why don't we just move you to Monday? And she says, and give yourself a day to really digest. This is a lot. And I actually agreed with her, and that's exactly what we did. And I immediately put myself on the Monday. So we're talking essentially 9 days after October 7th. And on that Sunday, I literally tried to mentally prepare myself as much as I could to think about, I mean, Eretz Yisrael was, especially at that moment, I mean, it is still today. I mean, everybody eats, drinks, and sleeps the fate of the hostages and our Chayalim being all on the various fronts. But at that moment, especially, you were just constantly looking for, you were constantly with your phone getting the latest news, the latest this, the latest that. And it was just a very emotionally very tough time. And I just really tried to think about the fact that that this was the right thing to do, and that this was a necessary part. And I think that that's maybe important for those women on the call, that sometimes, I think we all like to think about our Judaism and hope that we always are feeling things in a very motivated, lofty sort of way of our, that we approach our tefillah like that, and that we feel things that we always want to be moved by things. And we're not always fortunate enough to really feel that way in our kishkas. And I think that that I felt that this was I was in this moment at this time for a reason, and that I had whatever skill set it was that allowed me to have this privilege of being able to do Hachneset Meitim here in this case. And so on that Sunday, I really tried to think long and hard of just preparing myself that I would see things that would take me a long time. And I don't think, truth be told, I think I saw things that I will never, ever be able to forget. But I felt that the need to do this far outweighed any squeamishness on my part. And then I really tried to focus on the fact that sometimes mitzvahs call us more than we call them. And we have to just do them with as sincere a heart as we possibly can. And that we just do what we need to do.
Wow. Okay. And just to end off, are there any specific sensitivities that you think we can learn from what you saw, what you experienced? Is there anything that we can learn from what you did on behalf of Am Yisrael, aside for all of the lessons that I know we have already gained from everything you said? Is there anything specific you want us to walk away with, a lesson we should learn?
Just that I think we are all part of an incredibly special Amcha. If you could see the type of women, who are the usual Chevra Kadisha women, I was working with 3 Sephardic women who they were as soft as velvet and as tough as nails. And I've never seen, that combination so vividly in any human beings in my life as I did with these 3 women. The kavod hamet that they had, yet the matter of factness of what needed to get done, and the ability to stay. There were moments that our eyes, we had to wear masks. The smell was quite horrific. We all had put oil senses in our masks so that we could, I smelled eucalyptus the whole time, as opposed to the smell, because the bodies were you were already beginning to decompose. These women had an ability to be matter of fact and know what needed to be done. And we all fell in line in such nobody said, you stand here, you stand there, you do this, you do that. It became obvious from the get-go of what the methodology that was being used, and how everybody just pitched in and worked together. And we all understood what we had to do. And we all felt very much that this was the best that we could do for Amcha at that moment. And I say to you, all of you, I think the day will come when, it's already coming, where you can go and look on Instagram and TikTok and all of these places where Hamas says all of this stuff is being made up by Israel and Jews. I felt very much that we all stood witness to barbarians and what barbarians are capable of doing. And it was a lesson that we all have to remember every single day, because we are dealing with barbarians here. We are not dealing with humans. What transpired and what they did should never be forgotten. And we all have to hold that in our hearts, along with our prayers and our tefillot that our chayalim and the hostages should be returned safely and victoriously.
Okay. Thank you so much. We really, really appreciate you sharing your story.
Mhm.
And now we are going to go on to our third speaker of the evening. Thank you, Jody, for waiting so patiently. We are very honored to welcome you here tonight. Mrs. Jody Sender has 16 years of experience in women's health and wellness. She began her career as a birth and postpartum doula and later achieved certification as a nurse midwife. Currently, Jody is dedicated to her role at Shari Tzedek Hospital, where she offers comprehensive and compassionate care to women throughout their birthing journeys, empowering them to embrace their individual stories. In addition to her work at the hospital, Jody is the co-founder of Junior Side by Side, alongside her partner, Roz Goldberg, a doula and certified grief counselor. Jody provides a range of midwifery services. These include specialized birth education courses, concierge midwifery services, and birth trauma counseling. So thank you, Jody, for joining us here this evening. Can you please introduce yourself, where you're from, and tell us a little bit about what you do, what brought you to being a midwife, what your normal life is like before we get into that.
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to be here, and I'm really, really honored to be here. I have been living in Israel for 16 years with my husband Zev and my 4 boys. We live in Efrat. I started when we made Aliyah. Like most people who make Aliyah, I was trying to figure out what to do, where to find myself. I had graduated Queens College with a degree, a bachelor's in psychology, which making Aliyah doesn't really get you very far. And I was trying to figure it out. And I guess, as they say in Israel, b'mikra, which there is no mikra, you know, God led me in the path. My friend called me and said, I'm doing a doula course, which for those of you who don't know, a doula is a labor coach. Do you want to come? It's once a week, it's in English. You're not really doing anything anyways, just come with me. And at that point, I didn't have any kids, and I wasn't really interested in being a labor coach. But I said, oh, I want to have kids one day, so why not? I have nothing else to lose. And that's how it started. And I guess God knew before me that that's where I was meant to be. And then from the minute I started the course, it opened up a world that I never even knew existed. The minute I walked into the delivery room for the first time and was at a birth for the first time and saw birth, I felt like I came home. In my life, I never felt so connected, at peace, and understood that, oh, this is where I'm supposed to be. Now I need to figure out how I could make birth more peaceful and better. And I started my journey, and I came home to my husband and I said, I'm going to study to be a midwife. I don't really know what that means, and I don't really know how you do that in Israel, but I'm going to figure it out. And then it takes 8 years of school to become a midwife here. You have to go to nursing school first, then you have to get your master's degree in nursing, and then after that, you do a specialty to become a midwife. Throughout the entire process, I was working as a nurse. I worked in high-risk pregnancy. I worked in the maternity ward, and I worked in the NICU. And then as soon as I finished my midwifery training, I've been working in the delivery room. Throughout that process, I continued studying also different types of alternative medicine to help women and births and labor. And that's how, and I have really, really been very blessed to meet so many incredible women who have allowed me to be part of their births. and allowed me to be part of their special moment.
Wow. How has your role changed, shifted since October 7th? How has what happened impacted what you do?
Um, so you're asking a big question. It's as a midwife, we are trained, and because I have been a midwife for almost for 8 years, we're trained to deal with the unexpected. We're trained to deal with birth is unpredictable, birth is unplanned. And even when we try to plan, it usually doesn't go that way. So from my training at my core, I'm supposed to be prepared for the unprepared. On October 7th, I happened to be home, which it was the way it works here in Israel. For those of you who don't know, midwives are either home birth midwives, or we work in the hospital and we work shift work like nurses. So I had actually worked Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and the first day of Sukkot. And finally, Simchas Torah was the first Chag in all the Chagim that I was home. So I was really, really happy to be home. And I was happy to be able to go to shul with my boys, and I was really looking forward to that. And I woke up on October 7th to it's a regular morning, and we heard a lot of noise. I live in Efrat. Noise is not booms. Sometimes we hear planes overhead. It's not a unusual noise, so I didn't really think anything of it. And then once the sirens started, the first siren, I also didn't think anything of it, because we have sirens also, and even my kids are unfortunately, or fortunately, it depends how you look at it, know exactly what to do when there's a siren. They've had sirens in schools. They've had sirens. My little one in Gan knows what to do. But then slowly I realized we had one siren after another siren after another siren. And then we live across the street from a shul, and suddenly I see all these men running out of shul, getting into their cars, which is a vision I will never, ever forget. And then I understood, okay, something's bigger is going on. And then when they sent my husband home from shul, because they told everybody that they need to stay home. And then he had a little more information. So right away, I thought about the hospital and what was happening, and if I was going to be called into work, because a lot of times we have emergency protocols and emergency situations. And right away, my kids even asked me, "Oh, Ima, do you have to go? Like, are they waiting for you? Do you?" So they didn't call me in, but starting from October 7th, for the first 2 weeks, we went into what was called an emergency protocol, which meant our shifts were longer, because they didn't want people traveling back and forth too often. And also a lot of midwives, their husbands were in Miluim and were called up. And they weren't, and the kids, they weren't sure if they were going to have where to leave their kids and what to do. And especially we work nights, you can't leave little children home alone at night, who's going to stay with them. So they took a group of midwives whose husbands weren't in Miluim. My husband didn't go to the army, because when we made Aliyah, he was too old, I guess, as they say. So we went into doing longer shifts and being on call. And that was the first change. Now we're already back to regular shifts. But the real main change was understanding that I now, as the midwife, had to not only be the midwife. A lot of times I have to be the husband, because the woman's husband is in Miluim and he can't make it to the birth. A lot of times I'm trained in birth trauma, but I'm not trained in all other trauma. And a lot of women are coming to birth with a lot more trauma than they normally would, we have women from the South who had to leave their homes and are now living in hotels in Jerusalem and are coming to Shaare Zedek to give birth. So I have to not only be the midwife, but also be the trauma therapist and the trauma counselor. A lot of women are used to giving birth with their mothers or their sisters, which is very common practice in Israel. People bring their mothers and sisters, and they can't come for whatever reason, whether because they're with their kids or someone else is in Miluim. I'm also dealing with women who have losses, that their husbands have died and they're pregnant. Women who brothers have died and they're coming to give birth. So there's a lot of mixed emotions in the delivery room, a lot of nervous anxiety, but followed by a ton of joy. I think it really is very symbolic of the Jewish nation. I mean, we have Yom HaZikaron into Yom HaAtzmaut. We go from, the Jewish people know how to go from sadness to sheer joy about the building of a nation in the same moment. And that's basically what my everyday in the hospital is like. We are so happy that the Jewish people are continuing to grow and build, and healthy, beautiful babies are being born. I feel extremely blessed that I have the privilege and have been given the gift to be part of that. I'm not sure why I got to be one of the lucky ones who gets to do that. But also there's a lot of sadness and fear. And also on a technical, practical level, the hospital's really busy because we have a lot more births than we used to have. All the women from the north and the south who are living in Jerusalem are now giving birth in the Jerusalem hospitals. And just to put it a little into perspective, in Shaare Zedek, which is the busiest hospital in all of Israel, we have the most births every month. We normally have 1,300, 1,400 births a month. Since October 7th, we've had 1,800 plus births a month, which is a lot. Thank God, a lot more babies, but also means a lot busier. So women have to wait a little longer sometimes to get help. We're more midwives, but you can't create more delivery rooms that quickly, and you can't create more beds. I have been blown away by women's ability to rise to the occasion. I was thinking the whole time Shelley was talking about how tough Israeli women are, and their ability to rise up, especially when they're in labor, has been so unbelievable to watch. Women are also, it's been really busy, and women have said, oh, help her. She needs more help than me. I can wait. To think about it, anyone who's ever been in labor, to think about you're in labor and you're having contractions and you're able to say, oh, I can wait, go help her first, is an unbelievable thing to watch. Most days at work, I wish I could divide myself into 17 pieces so I could give every single woman everything at every moment. But knowing that the women are able to rise to the occasion and they don't actually really need me is an unbelievable thing to watch.
Wow.
Jewish women have been giving birth in hard situations forever. Women, especially Jewish women, are able to rise above. There are stories of women who gave birth in concentration camps, in the Holocaust, in a horrible, like in horrible conditions, and they're able to. So it's been different, but it's also been a real honor and privilege to help them.
Wow. Are there any specific stories that stand out to you, specific experiences that you've witnessed and participated in?
So the truth is, every birth is a story, and I really believe that. I do a lot of birth education, and the biggest thing I tell women is your birth is your story. So I really had a hard time choosing what stories to tell. But I spent a lot of time thinking, and I spoke to a bunch of other midwives, and I asked them what they thought also, to just hear their feedback. And Emma, you also helped me. We've had the story that first kept coming to mind was on October 8th, when on Motzei Simchat Torah, once we all really realized what was going on. And to be honest, at that moment, I don't think we really realized the true extent of what we were dealing with. I had to go to work. I wasn't supposed to, but they called me because they knew that my husband wasn't in Miluim, and without even hesitation, I mean, I am really blessed to have a very supportive husband and family and kids who know that when birth calls, the midwife has to go. So I got to work, and it was a night shift. I work mostly nights, and the women coming into the delivery room were very worried about, what do I do if there's a siren and I'm giving birth? Where do I go? What happens? We were at the hospital, we have protocols, just like every hospital. But you can have protocols from here till tomorrow. A lot of times protocols don't relieve the anxiety. They tell the staff what to do, but it doesn't help the woman who's coming. And so we were very clear. Every woman who asked, we told her what the protocol was, and we explained what we were going to do. And depending on what stage of labor you were in, really depended on what we were going to do. Those of you who've had children and been in birth, you know, there are certain times you can't really go to the safe room because you're busy. So the story that really stands out is I was delivering a woman, and she was pushing, and the head was half out, and there was a siren. As a midwife and a NICU nurse, I'm good at canceling out background noise when birth is going on. So it took me a second to realize that it was a siren. And the woman at first didn't realize, and the husband, who was standing next to her head, looked at me, and I gave him this look of like, don't say anything. If she doesn't realize anything, we're not moving. Like, I just gave him this look of like, just don't say anything. And we had been together already, the couple and I, for a few hours. So we already had like a very good communication. And then the woman realized, and she was like, what are we going to do? What's going to happen? And so I looked at her and I said to her, Shira, you're going to push, and I'm going to pray, and you're going to have a baby. And sorry, And she was like, and she said, okay. And she took a deep breath and she pushed. And the minute the siren ended, the baby came out crying. And to hear the juxtaposition between a siren and a baby crying is the most incredible thing to hear. And that's how the women of Israel who have been pregnant during this time and who have been giving babies during this time has been. They take a deep breath and they push and they do. So that is always the story that comes true. Another story, which is more of a lighter one and a funny one, I do planned C-sections. I don't do the surgery, but I'm the midwife who takes care of the baby during the planned C-section. So a woman had a planned C-section and her husband was called up to Miluim, but he told them and they said, okay, the day of the C-section, you can leave and go to the C-section and then you could come back. So he came in his uniform and he had a huge M16. And the way it works to go into a C-section, you have to be sterile. And he had this huge M16. And the rules of the army is when you have your gun, you can't put it down. You can't give it to someone. It's your responsibility. It has to be with you. So me and the doctor and the operating room nurses were trying to figure out what are we supposed to do with this gun so he can come into the C-section and it's still sterile. And it was this almost, we were all kind of even laughing because we're like, what type of reality is it that we're trying to figure out how to bring in an enormous gun into this. So we figured out how I find always in Israel the ability to be creative and figure out how to solve the problem is unbelievable. And we took a sterile gown and wrapped his gun, and then he put on his sterile gown on top of that, and he came in and he sat next to his wife, and she had a beautiful baby boy. And then from that moment on, it became a regular thing that guns and huge M16s were going into the operating room, and we just figured out how to work it out. Another story that I was thinking about is we have women who are from Ofakim or any of the Shuvim down south who are pregnant, and they are pregnant and they have their baby. And as any woman who's been pregnant before, you plan your birth to go a certain way. You plan to give birth in a specific hospital. You plan after your birth to go to your house or be with your mother. You have a plan. And even if it's not your first, when the birth doesn't go according to the plan, it's really hard. And it's really hard in general. And then you add, you are a woman and you're pregnant and you don't have your home to go to. You don't have all your stuff, all your baby stuff, which seems, and even if someone gives you baby stuff, it's not your baby stuff, it's somebody else's. You are living in a hotel room with your other children, and now you have a newborn, and you're trying to figure out how am I going to nurse in the middle of the night, change a diaper in the middle of the night without waking up my other children, because we're all living in one room. So, and I'm going to this hospital that I've never been to. I don't know where the delivery room is. I don't even know where the bathroom is. It's little things like that that I see have been really scary for women and hard for women. I started in my business support groups for women who are pregnant once a week, free support groups. And basically it's a Zoom just like this, and the women come on and they could talk about what they're feeling and talk about their questions, and we kind of just work out solutions. We work out unbelievable the way women who are living in hotels are able to come and turn off all those things that are going on and birth their baby so fantastically. Another story that I was thinking about was on October 9th or 10th. Yeah, 10th. I had a woman come from Ofakim to give birth. And she had left her house, gone to a family member in the Merkaz, then she went into labor and came to us. And she had nothing. She didn't have a bag. She didn't have, I mean, if anyone who's gotten into labor could imagine what it feels like. People pack their bag to go to labor like 3 months before they go and have a baby and keep it in their car. I mean, I have a whole handout that I give to women in my course, how to pack your bag. And this woman came with nothing. And I remember she said to me, she's like, her tichel was like really dirty and she was wearing the same tichel since the day she left her house. And she kept like futzing with the tichel and moving it. And you could tell like it was dirty and this. So I said to her, or what, like I was trying to figure out what's going on with the tichel and what's happening. And she said, no, I think there's like dirt in it and it's itchy and it's really not comfortable. So I said, and there are a lot of women who I work with who they don't uncover their hair when they give birth. So I said to her, I have an extra tichel in my locker. Do you want it? Might not be your taste, but do you want it? And she was like, oh, that would. And I gave her my tichel, which I don't even know how clean it was, but it was cleaner than hers. And she put it on and it was amazing to see. The minute she put it on, her labor went much quicker and everything just kind of fell into place. So those are the stories. I'm going to just share one last story, even though I could go on for hours with it. One last story. I want to talk about the women whose husbands are in the army and they come and give birth. A lot of the women, their husbands are released and their husbands make it for the birth. But there's a lot of tension surrounding that because we don't control the pace of birth and we don't control the pace that the army lets husbands out. Sometimes they're on missions and it takes longer to get in touch with them. Not all of the Chayalim have their phones because they're inside Gaza. So I had a woman, I was the charge midwife on a night shift, and I got a phone call from the head of the hospital that there's a woman coming in whose husband is a very high officer in the army up north, and he can't come and he can't call, and she's coming by herself, and the husband's really nervous about how she's going to be. So he had someone call on his behalf, and could we just make sure she gets everything she needs? So this woman came in and all she wanted was an epidural. And at that moment, I did not have a room to put her in to get an epidural, which I know in America, that's, from what I understand, that's not like a concept that happens, that there aren't rooms or there isn't a place to go because you have your doctor. Sometimes in Israel, you have to wait a little bit till the delivery room opens. And I went into the delivery room and I spoke to the nurse, the midwife inside, and I said, it doesn't matter what happens, we need to find this woman a room and we need to get her epidural, because this is what she needs and her husband's protecting us, and this is the least we can do for this woman. And we ended up, another woman gave birth. And the way it works, we have one set of cleaning staff that cleans the room after the delivery, and the cleaning staff was cleaning the other room. So me and a bunch of the other midwives, we cleaned the room with all the chemicals and all those things. So so that this woman could go in and have her epidural and have her room, and just to make sure that she had the things that she needed. And this story, I'm telling you so you could not to give me credit and not to give me oh, I cleaned the room. It's to give you an understanding of what the feeling is in the hospital, that, oh, I'll clean a room, I'll clean a bed, I'll change, I will do whatever has to be done to give my part and to help and to try to make things a little better and a little easier. And that's really what I want you to take away from all of this, that the women and every little bit that someone does to help a pregnant woman or a woman who's about to have a baby or who just had a baby makes such a huge difference.
Well, thank you so much, Jody. And I think these stories all, like, as you said, like, you could clearly go on forever. I'm sure there are so many stories, but really so inspirational, each and every one of them. And I know that you're not meaning to congratulate yourself, but we can congratulate you. So thank you for doing all of that. And thank you for sharing with us.
My pleasure.
Really
Thank you for the
appreciate
opportunity.
Okay. What's going on here? Sorry. Now I just want to open up. I know the hour is quite late. I just want to open up the floor. If anyone has a question, they can write in the chat. And if not, then we will close for the evening. Okay. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us tonight. Thank you to all of the speakers that shared. It was really, really moving and impactful. And I know that I feel more closely connected to the situation now that we are finishing than before we started. So I know it was not easy to share, but at least I can say personally, just from my perspective, I feel like our goal was accomplished. So thank you so much for sharing. And Emirz Hashem, may we not have to speak about these situations anymore. May we be able to only focus on the beauty of Am Yisrael in good times and not in such challenging times. So thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.
Have a good night.
Good night.